Hey guys, welcome back here to Intuitive Angling, and appreciate you guys swinging by the channel and checking out the episode today. And guys, today I want to talk about some jig fishing tips and tricks every angler should know. There is a ton to know about jigs, but there's about 5 or 6 different things that you really need to know about jig fishing in terms of like how to work a jig and a little bit of some modifications that you can do to jig to hook more fish and get more bites. So we're just going to cover a few of them today, a few of the most important ones, and definitely think it's going to add up to some more jig fish. So a little sleepy this morning, guys. Eyes are still puffy. I'd been getting up super early all week. Slept in this morning until about 7:30. Just got out of bed about 20 minutes ago. So trying to get all awake here. But God, that's the one thing about, the busier you are, the less you get to sleep. So it's nice to, not that sleeping until 7:30 is sleeping in, but it is for me here. Also, guys, for get started, a couple quick things here. We're going to be talking about my Blaukat Throwback jig from Cumberland Pro Lures today. I will have my throwback jig link in the description of the video here. My jigs, guys, they have living rubber, hand-tied living rubber skirts, which very few jigs, I don't even know if any at Tackle Warehouse except mine has living rubber. Living rubber is the best skirt material because it glows in the water and it has more action. The reason you don't see more of it, very labor intensive to tie, but we did at Cumberland Pro Lures, so link in the description. And one quick thing, guys, SolarBat has announced their big May sale, Mother's Day sale, 40% off, guys, 40% off on my Signature Series glasses, my RB2s and 3s, 3 different frame styles. If you use the promo code RandyB, you get free shipping and handling, so I'll have that link in this description of this video too, so appreciate that. Excuse me. Okay, guys, I've always said, a lot of you guys that watch the channel, you hear me talking about this a lot. The 2 most complicated, complex techniques in bass fishing are jig fishing and jerkbait fishing. And simply, the reason that is because there's so many variables to it. In terms of, like, for both of them, you're dealing with different type of profiles, colors, actions, cadences, areas you want to fish them in. Specifically in jigs, you're dealing with skirt color, skirt length, you're dealing with how many strands are in the skirt, you're dealing with hook size, you're dealing with head size, you're dealing with line size in correlation with the sink rate on your jig, trailer combinations, how to work a jig, how to set the hook on it. It just goes on and on and on. But I've got a couple different things here I want to go over that will really help your jig fishing in terms of getting more bites and landing the fish once you get them. Okay, the first of all, let's talk about how to modify a jig based upon what you're trying to accomplish here. This right here is an example of a full skirt. This is the way this is the way the skirts come out of the package. On my throwback jig, the skirts are long on it, and we leave the skirt long on purpose because this way you can modify the skirt length based upon your trailer length. Sometimes you want a trailer that is longer. So you want the jig skirt to be able to cover up about half of the body there. And sometimes if you thread the trailer on, you want it shorter. So let me give you sort of a prime example of what I'm talking about. If you hang a jig skirt just like that by leaving the skirt long, it's longer. But say, for example, and I don't thread the chunks, but I'm just going to do it for the sake of the video. Let's say you thread this on like you're using a super chunk or something. I just don't have one with me here. The jig is going to be a shorter profile, so sometimes you need to trim the skirt back. So let me give you some tips and advice on how to trim a jig skirt. First of all, even with a full-size jig skirt like this, you want to take a pair of scissors, and even if you don't want to cut off much of the length, you want to make, excuse me, you want to make the strands uneven a little bit. So come in there and cut off a few of them where you got some wild-looking strands. See those strands right there? That's what you want, is you want it to be uneven. And then if you want a really short skirt, you can cut it off flat along the bottom like that, and then come into and make it crazy looking after you've taken some of the length off there. And this way you got a smaller profile, and if you're threading a trailer on there, or if you're using a shorter trailer, it can be seen on there, and your overall size of the jig skirt and jig profile is going to be different. Now, some of the times that I do like a shorter profile, say for example, if the fishing is a little bit tougher, if I want to use a smaller trailer, if the water's a little bit clearer, And if I want to use a full-size trailer, a lot of times it's going to be because the the water's dirtier, or fish are a little bit more aggressive and they want a little bit bigger bait. Okay, now on top of that, let's talk about the trailer itself. Anytime that you're using a trailer, like this is a Zoom Big Salty Chunk, one of my favorites, you want to take some of the plastic off the front here. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to cut it like that. And see what this does is, see the amount of plastic that you have right there? This is going to make it where when you hook your hook on there, you just barely got a piece of plastic around the pork like that. And what this does is it takes some of that plastic mass away from the hook, which a lot of times that plastic will impede a hook set. It gives it a lot more of a bite gap there. Plus you got more freedom of movement on the jig skirt, when you have less plastic material. And then sometimes with it, I'll modify my trailers based upon what I want to accomplish out of it. Sometimes I'll take some more of the plastic off of it if I want a little bit smaller profile. So there's a lot of different ways that you can modify it when it comes to that. But getting your jigs, the setup on it in terms of making it look good is very, very important, because like I said, you want to make a jig where it's gnarly looking. You don't want any type of uniformity on a jig. You want to make it where it's just sort of crazy looking. And I can promise you guys, you get more bites when you do that. So just trim them up like that. I am a stickler for this. I mean, one of the things that I cannot stand, or I won't do, is guys that take a jig right out of the package and a trailer right out of the package, and they just tie the jig on and put their trailer on and go fishing. I always want to modify it, because my jigs look a lot better, with the modification. I mean, look at that. Doesn't that just look edible there? So that's one type of a modification with it. Another thing with jig fishing you need to remember is use heavy line. Unless you're using a finesse jig, which I do make that Blaukat Power finesse jig. If you're using a regular, pitching and flipping jig, you want to use heavy line on it most all the time. And there's a couple different reasons for this. Mainly is because of the fall of the bait. I use 25-pound test Seaguar and Visix probably 95% of the time for my jig fishing. I like the way that it falls with 25-pound test line. If you put a jig on 25-pound test and then put it on like 17 or 15, notice the difference in the fall. You have more of a vertical fall with lighter line. It falls faster, and that 25-pound gives it more of a glide like that, slows the bait down a little bit. If I do want to speed it up, I just go to heavier head size. But for whatever reason, and this is one of the things that my jig mentor Terry Thomas taught me 40 years ago. The fall angle and the fall rate of a jig is critical to success, and I can't explain it why, but 25-pound test fluorocarbon is what you want to use most of the time. And I don't care, guys, if I'm pitching a bare rock bank or around boat dock or whatever, I'm using 25 most all the time with my flipping stick. So that's really, really important to do that. Another thing with the jig is how you work a jig. A lot of people sort of make a mistake of working a jig like a worm. Now, if you're fishing a worm, guys, a lot of people throw it out there and they're just dragging a worm like that. Maybe they'll twitch it a little bit and pull it up. You don't want to work a jig like that. You want to create a reaction strike out of a jig, because a jig versus a plastic bait look how much larger of a profile that a jig is from like a worm here. So given that, a jig is going to be the bite. What creates a bite on a jig a lot of times is a reaction strike, because let me explain here. If you're fishing a worm on the bottom like this is a natural looking bait. So the fish, when they come down on that worm like that, it's very subtle and natural. So you're barely moving this worm along the bottom. It looks natural like that. And a lot of times they'll see it and then they'll just suck it in. But if you're using a jig, that's a lot bigger commitment for a fish. So when a bass is coming down on that jig like that, it does not look completely natural. It doesn't look like a plastic worm or something like that. So they're going to be a little bit more hesitant on it. So that's why you want to create a reaction strike out of the jig by hopping that jig off the bottom. So when you're working a jig, make your cast out there and hop it like that. Let it go back down, hop it like that. Maybe you can shake it a little bit like that, but make sure you get that hop. So coming down the water like that, you're maybe just, shaking a little bit and then hop it off the bottom. And that hopping will help create that reaction strike from a larger profile, bait. It's sort of like the same as like a swim bait or a glide bait. A lot of times you'll give it a hard twitch or speed it up and that'll get that fish to hit it. So that's really, really important with that. Okay, a couple other things is with a jig, you always want to try to get it in the heaviest cover possible. So like now don't get me wrong, you can catch fish on a jig by pitching it around the edge of a log or even pitching it just down a bluffy, rocky bank. You can catch fish doing that. But since a jig is a bulkier lure, the place that a jig really shines in is the thickest cover you can get it in. So therefore, if you see a laydown tree in the water, try to put it in the gnarliest, tightest spot of the limbs. Or if you are fishing a boat dock or something, try to get that jig up underneath that boat dock to where it's darkest underneath there. Or the same with like any type of a cover, lily pads, cattails, or whatever. Use the jig as your benefit to try to penetrate the thicker cover. This is really, really what's going to make it a lot more effective with that. And then finally, guys, the hook set on a jig. One of the things about jig fishing, and I've learned the hard way with this, is you don't ever want to set the hook on a slack line with a jig. You will lose more fish than anything, because what happens is a lot of times the fish will come up and they'll grab that whole jig like that in their mouth, especially a big fish. And if you're close to that fish, like say for example, you're pitching and flipping down an area and you whack that fish hard with a flipping stick with 25-pound test line on a slack hook set, a lot of times the force of that hook set will blow that fish's mouth open and that jig will come right out of its mouth. Or if you do happen to get it, a lot of times that jig will penetrate the thin part of a fish's mouth right here that you can tear very easily, and you tear the mouth and it'll jump off. So what you want to do on a jig, like a lot of other stuff out there, is don't get in a big hurry. Pitch that in there. You're working your jig like that. Boom, you see your line jump, or you see your line moving out. Don't get in a big hurry. Just take time and reel down to it. Make sure your line is tight. Don't ever set on a slack hook. Make sure that line is tight and then set the hook back on it. That is going to allow you to land a lot more fish than you would if you use that slack hook set all the time. And I learned the hard way with that. I set the hook with the slack hook set, guys, for a decade, and the number of fish that I lost on the jig was, when I started setting it on a tight set, I started landing 50% more fish. I mean, if that makes any equation with that. And finally, one other thing, guys, this is what you're going to find out in general with jig fishing. The darker and the brighter the color you use, like a black and chartreuse here, or some type of a dark black, it's going to produce bigger fish. But you're not going to get as many bites on it. There's a sacrifice. So bright, dark colors like this, bigger fish. Natural colors like greens and browns are going to get you more bites, but the size will not be as big. I'm not saying you can't catch good ones on it, but the difference, if you catch 100 bass on this jig right here, black and chartreuse, versus 100 jig on the brown like here, I can promise you those 100 bass are going to weigh more on the black and chartreuse than the brown. So anyway, guys, that's just a few random jig tips. I think if you utilize them, it'll help you catch more fish. So we'll check in later.